Good afternoon, everybody. How are you today? Hope everything is going well, and we're so happy that you've taken time to join us for this session of our life group. A suggestion actually was given to me a couple of weeks ago that rather than finish on last week's lesson, that I spend at least one session answering any questions that anyone might have regarding our study of the book of Revelation. So that's what I decided to do. So I kind of opened up everything last week, giving you an opportunity to share with me any questions that you might have. We did receive a couple of questions, and then I've found a couple of others that are pretty commonly asked that I wanted to share with you today. So I have four major questions that I'm going to address in today's lesson. And I hope that this will kind of wrap everything up as far as the book of Revelation is concerned. The very first of these questions that came to me from one of our class members last week was this. Now that the study is over, could you actually give us a complete timeline of all of the events that will take place that have been described in the book of Revelation? So I'm going to do that today, and I'm going to share with you a graphic that's going to stay up a pretty good while. So if you want to copy that graphic or sketch it down in your notebooks, you can certainly feel free to do so. It kind of has a lot of things in it, so you'll want to watch it carefully, and I will point out some other aspects of that timeline that I think will be important to you. So bear with me here. Here is the timeline called the Great Tribulation Timeline. It will look at everything that we have here in the book of Revelation that's described here, and it covers just about everything. Let me go at it from the very beginning. I'm going to use my little pointer here to show you exactly what is happening. Well, my pointer went away, but let me see if I can get that back. In the meantime, let me just share with you, as you go to the far left of this graphic, you will see a cross. Now that cross represents the Christian era, the era in which we actually live now. It is the time that the Christian church will thrive, and the point at which Christianity will attempt to evangelize the world. And then you will see a line, a vertical line, that represents the rapture. Now, the rapture, as we know, is mentioned in 1 Thessalonians 4:15 through 18 and 1 Corinthians 15:51 through 53. Now, to be quite honest with you, just a bit prior to the rapture, where you see this little fish hook there just in front of the rapture, that it kind of represents the birth pains that are mentioned in the Bible. If you read Matthew chapter 24, verses 3 through 8, you will be reading what is actually known as the Olivet message, the passage where Jesus sat down on the Mount of Olives and spoke with his disciples, sometimes known as the Olivet Discourse. In that Olivet Discourse, he talks about these are the signs that you must look for, and they would be signs of like a woman in labor. These would be the labor pains. These are the wars and rumors of wars and famines and earthquakes that you would experience in the world as the pains leading up to the beginning of the end time. So that will occur just before the rapture. It's likely, quite frankly, that those may be the days in which we find ourselves today. We certainly don't find ourselves beyond the rapture because that has not occurred. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So I think we're really in the birth pains time. We do see a lot of earthquakes happening around the world that have happened over the last few years, some in kind of remote and distant places. We've also seen famines in certain parts of the world. We've seen all kinds of events that have occurred that tend to lead us to believe, at least, that we are living in the time of the birth pains. Now, when the rapture occurs, of course, the church will be taken out of the world. Christians will be raptured to heaven. We will take on a new kind of body, I'm sure, to live that particular period of time with Christ in the heavenlies. It is just after the rapture that we can begin to see the tribulation begin to occur. It will occur beginning with the rapture and will occur for 7 years. Now, we do know from our study of Revelation that the first 3.5 years, that period that you see noted as Revelation 6:1 through 10:11, will be principally a period of peace. The scroll judgments will occur at the very beginning of that time, right after, I think, the rapture occurs, which will be a summary of what is going to happen in a much more calculated manner during the last half of the tribulation. The scroll judgments, as you may recall, begin with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, representing peace, the white horse, and then war and famine and death. Those occur in a very limited fashion during these first 3.5 years, because that peace, remember, is going to be overwhelming during this 3.5 years. We will experience peace during that whole time, even though these other events represented by these horses will be occurring. They will occur on a very, very limited basis during that first 3.5 years. Beginning also with the rapture, it's not on this particular graphic, but if you wanted to put a line down, or a long parenthesis down below rapture and extend it all the way over to the line that says second coming, that is actually Daniel's 70th week that we see described in the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel, we know, is a very image-based book, a prophecy of these end times, and it represents this tribulation period from the beginning at the rapture to the end at the second coming of Jesus. Then after 1,260 days, 42 months, 3.5 years, we come to the mid-trib period. Now, the mid-trib period represents the time that the Antichrist, even though he has been around, he's the one that's actually negotiated this peace that has occurred during the first 3.5 years. But it is at the point of mid-tribulation that the Antichrist then begins his abomination of desolation, which is both mentioned in Daniel and in the book of Revelation, and he sits in the temple where the sacrifices would have occurred. That is the abomination of desolation. He sits there. The image of the beast is set up. He is ruling from that temple in Jerusalem at mid-trib. And then for the next 3.5 years, he will rule supreme in the tribulation. Now, it is during this latter 3.5 years, that we see the trumpet judgments. We know that the 7th scroll judgment will occur right at mid-tribulation. The trumpet judgments will begin with the 7th seal judgment. The first trumpet judgment is actually a part of the 7th seal judgment. And then when the trumpet judgments occur, they begin to occur in a much grander fashion. Grander meaning numerical, many more. 1/3, for example, of everything is affected in the trumpet judgments. Those trumpet judgments then occur during pretty much the first half of the latter 3.5 years of the tribulation. And then as we near the second coming, the bowl judgments begin to occur. Now, the bowl judgments are the most devastating. They are the most severe. The severity of the bowl judgments really completes God's plan of wrath on the unbelieving world that he has come back to claim. We know that the scroll judgments were just fairly minor. They affected only a small portion of the world at that time. The trumpet judgments stepped it up a bit. They affected a third of the world and a third of the population, a third of the unbelievers. But then when the bowl judgments occur, they affect the whole world. They affect everything. They affect the environment. They affect the people. They affect the animals. They affect everything. There is nothing that escapes the effectiveness of the bowl judgments. That's why they come just before the second coming. That too occurs then over 1,260 days, 42 months, or the latter 3.5 years. And then the second coming. It is that second coming when Jesus comes down from heaven. He rides on that white horse, arrayed in his bloody robe, ready to do battle. And the battle of Armageddon, described in Revelation 19:11-21, occurs. And there Jesus defeats the armies that have been brought against Israel and the Christian world. And he defeats them in an instant. And then a marriage feast of the Lamb occurs at the beginning of the reign of Jesus on the earth during that 1,000-year millennium period. During that period, Jesus will reign supreme on the earth, and we will reign with him. This is the beauty of being able to be here during the millennium. We will reign with Christ during that millennium time. And then the very last vertical upright that you see on this graphic represents the great white throne judgment. It is at that time then we will all gather, we with Jesus judging, Jesus then with the books of life judging the unbelieving world. And there he will cast Satan into the lake of fire. He's already cast the beast and the prophet in the lake of fire. Now he will cast all of the unbelieving world into the lake of fire. And then eternity begins. There is a new heaven and a new earth that will then be established. And in that new heaven and new earth, we will be the residents. We will reign supreme. We will enjoy the tree of life, the trees of life that line the boulevard of heaven. We will enjoy the pure water that will flow from the throne of God through Jesus to us. And we will live in that perpetual peace forever and forever. Worshiping God, praising Jesus, just enjoying the company of each other and our Heavenly Father. That's kind of the timeline. That's the way in a premillennialist world that we believe that the end times will actually occur. Now, for those who do not hold the premillennialist view, they have other timelines, and certainly they have a basis upon which, I guess, to have those timelines. But this is the one that I believe in, and I believe that Revelation reveals to us in the end as far as God's plan is concerned. Like I said from the very beginning of this study, God had a plan at the beginning, and I think he has a plan at the end. And what that plan is to reward those of us who believe in him, who have trusted in him, who have put our faith in him, to live forever in an eternal New Jerusalem that he has prepared already for us. And he just simply awaits our coming. So I hope that kind of clears up a little bit about the timeline of the book of Revelation. Now, the second question that came to me from one of our class members was, will it be possible for those who receive the mark of the beast to finally be saved during the tribulation? It's an interesting question because there will be a lot of people left once the rapture occurs and we're gone. We know that God is going to take us home. And so there's going to be a lot of people left who are going to have a big decision to make. So the question is, if you are living during the tribulation, let's pose this question even before we get to this specific one. If you're living during the tribulation, you obviously were an unbeliever. Do you have an opportunity to come to Christ? The answer to that question is a very plain and simple yes. And there will be those who will come to know Christ, and in fact, they are represented as the martyrs in the book of Revelation, whose lives typically are taken. They are martyred because they have finally seen the light. They have come to Christ. They know Him as their Savior. They are ready to enjoy the benefits of the New Jerusalem. And they have made that right decision even though they made it late. So yes, if you're an unbeliever going into the tribulation, you do have an opportunity to become a Christian, to accept Christ, and then likely will be martyred. Not everybody, I don't believe, will be martyred, but many of them will be martyred, and it is the blood of these martyred saints that we read about. For example, the blood below the altar that we read about with the angel addressing the altar with the flaming lantern. All of these represent those people who are martyred as a result of accepting Jesus during the tribulation. But the texts of Revelation do seem to imply that people who receive the mark of the beast do so by choice, and by doing so, they eliminate the probability that they will turn to Jesus and be saved. Doesn't mean that they can't, but it means that the probability of doing that is so slim it's almost non-existent. The mark, as you know, is first mentioned in Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 through 17, where John writes that it will be required of people during the tribulation to buy or sell anything. It will be impossible to buy or sell anything during the tribulation if you do not have the mark of the beast. This means that in order to be able to obtain even the basic essentials of life, you must bear that mark. So the resulting pressure to have this mark will be enormous. And it'll be constant. It's something that will take place almost all the time. Now, as we read Revelation, it would appear that the mark is probably something that is going to be external or visible, something like a brand mark or a tattoo. However, I mean, we know from today's technology that it could also be something like an RFID chip or even a nano technological vaccine. There are many ways that this mark can be given. I think it will be a visible mark, so the vaccine is likely not in play, but the RFID chip certainly could be something that is taken under the skin that's visible and leaves a mark. So it becomes an issue in the second half of the tribulation when concern over worship of the beast or the Antichrist becomes a major dilemma. Because if you worship the beast, you take the mark. If you don't worship the beast and refuse to worship the beast, you will not take the mark. And then if you don't take the mark, you can't buy or sell anything. So the essentials of life are no longer available to you. Now, external tattoos, we must understand that external tattoos were common in John's day. For example, soldiers often had some kind of a mark on their body denoting their battalion or their loyalty to their army. And people who worshiped gods oftentimes had marks on their bodies denoting their devotion to their gods. So these brands were a way of openly identifying with a battalion or a specific religion. You may recall that in a similar way, the 144,000 Jews, the evangelists that are going out during the tribulation to preach the gospel, will receive a mark. They will be sealed by God on their foreheads, and that will identify them as righteous followers of Jesus. You'll find that in Revelation chapter 7, verse 3. Now, the mark of the beast is mentioned a number of times in Revelation after its initial mentioning in the 13th chapter. For example, you'll find it in Revelation 14, 9 through 11, in Revelation 16, 2, 19, 20, and also in chapter 20, verse 4. You find all of these are references to the mark of the beast. This mark gives evidence that the individual who bears this particular mark has freely chosen to take the mark and worship the beast, worship the Antichrist. The mark, which will either be the name of the beast or a numerical value of that name, will be a symbol of loyalty, a symbol of fidelity to the beast. A person will be saying to the world, I love the beast. I am devoted to the work of the beast. I'm a missionary for the beast. And having the mark and worshiping will simply go together. They can't be separated. The identity is really more than an identity. It is more than an indication of your loyalty. It is just who you are. It's an indication that anyone without the mark will not worship the beast. In fact, in Revelation chapter 20, verse 4, the martyrs that I just mentioned, who have been slain, who have been killed for their loyalty to Jesus, who once were committed to sin and were unrepentant, and now have become loyal to Jesus, are specifically identified in that particular verse, chapter 20, verse 4, as those who neither received the mark nor worshiped the beast. Now in Revelation 14, 9 through 11, there is a special angelic announcement that is made that warns the beast worshipers of the coming undiluted wrath of God. So they are warned. The unbelievers, who, even those who take the mark, are warned that if you worship the beast, you are going to suffer the consequences. You're going to suffer the judgment of God. Also, it appears to be a warning to the people on earth who are tempted to avoid these great economic hardships and wrath of the beast by taking the mark. Perhaps those who have not yet taken the mark, being pressured to take the mark, but understanding that if they do, they have been warned. It is not as though the unbelieving world was not warned from the very beginning. We've known about the warnings of Revelation since this book was written in the first century AD. So they've been warned, they've been told that God's wrath is far worse than any wrath you're ever going to experience here on earth. It is the clear conclusion that if they choose to align themselves with the beast, that they too will experience God's wrath. And God's wrath will indeed be poured out on the beast and his followers in that vengeful, undiluted final series of bowl judgments that we read about in Revelation 16. So the conclusion is that those who make the willful choice of taking the mark of the beast and thus worship the beast will experience the wrath of God, and they will not be eligible for the salvation of God. Now, another question that was asked of me was, what role do the Jews play in Revelation? This is an interesting question, and it's one that many people have asked, and I think in order to answer this particular question, we really must go back a bit and look at several aspects of prophecy. Let's start, I think a good starting place will be the prophecies that are currently being fulfilled. So follow me on this. The first prophecy that I think is currently being fulfilled or has begun to be fulfilled is this: the Jewish people will be regathered in unbelief from the four corners of the earth. We find that in Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 34, and in Isaiah 11, verses 11 through 12. So when might I think that this is being fulfilled? Well, actually, it began to be fulfilled during the last century. The first returning Jews to Palestine actually came during the 20th century, primarily from Eastern Arab countries. If you look at history, the next major movement of Jews en masse came from the Western countries of Europe, especially Germany, and especially after World War II. Then they came in great numbers from Russia, from the north, during the 1980s. And then this last migration of Jews returning to Israel came from Ethiopia in the south. So we know from history that these migrations have been taking place, and there has been a widespread migration of Jews back to Israel. There have been many Americans who have gone back to Israel. And so the returning migrations have seemed to fulfill, or at least are fulfilling, this prophecy that we see in Ezekiel and in Isaiah. Now, the second prophecy is that the state of Israel will be reestablished. We see that in Isaiah 66, 7 and 8, and in Ezekiel 37, 21 through 22. Well, that's a pretty easy fulfillment because we already know, not just from history, but from news, that Israel as a nation had not really existed as a separate nation for nearly 2,500 years. But on May the 14th, 1948, a new sovereign state was enacted or declared by an act of the United Nations, and that state was Israel. So the state of Israel was reinstated, was reformed, was reborn in a single day on May 14, 1948. That prophecy has now been fulfilled. The third prophecy is that the Jews will once again reoccupy the city of Jerusalem. That is prophesied in Zechariah chapter 8, verses 4 through 8. That fulfillment came on June the 7th, 1967, the infamous 6 Days War, when Israeli forces entered Jerusalem once more, defeating the Egyptian forces, and they were able to retake Jerusalem, and now they do occupy that. And as you know, recently, President Trump moved our embassy from where it was located in Tel Aviv to the capital city, the new declared capital city of Israel, which is now Jerusalem. The fourth prophecy, the land of Israel will be reclaimed from its desolation, becoming once again a land of agricultural abundance. That is prophesied in Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 34 through 35. Now, if you've not gone to Israel, you may not understand or know that this prophecy has been being fulfilled also since the last century. Israel has been marvelous in its ability to become a self-supporting country. And quite frankly, as far as I know, and unless someone can correct me, I don't know of another country in the world that is self-supporting, dependent on no other nation to provide the commodities that are required to sustain life like Israel does. They have their own food supply, their own water supply, their energy supply, everything that they need to sustain life as a nation, they are able to provide for themselves. So it would appear then that this prophecy then has already been fulfilled or is certainly being fulfilled today. The fifth prophecy is that the Hebrew language will be revived from the dead. Well, Hebrew is pretty popular in the Middle East, certainly in Israel and in the Palestinian area. We find that prophecy in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9, and it has been being fulfilled beginning in the 19th century all the way through the 20th century and even today. Hebrew is still an extant language, still being spoken today, still being understood today, and still the common language of the Israeli people. The sixth prophecy is that all the nations of the world will come together against Israel over the issue of the control of Jerusalem. Now, the Israelis may occupy Jerusalem today. That prophecy is found, by the way, in Zechariah chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. But that is a prophecy that is currently occurring. It is a prophecy that we see happening as we speak. A prophecy that we know is going to be completely fulfilled because it is prophesied in the Bible. But we are seeing that fulfillment even as we live today. Now, those are the prophecies that are currently being fulfilled or have been fulfilled in the case of Israel as a nation. There are also prophecies that are yet to be fulfilled. And I want us to look at those particular prophecies and how they play a role in the book of Revelation. The first of these is that an Arab alliance will attack Israel in a coordinated attempt to destroy the state of Israel, but it will be soundly defeated. That's found in Zechariah 12:2. Now, that could very well be an identification of the Six-Day War. There were several Arab nations that did come against Israel in that war, but by and large, I think it's more referring to what is going to occur near the end of the tribulation, a time when an Arab alliance will once more occur. A major alliance will occur. They will join with other nations, perhaps like Russia and or China, and they will come in an alliance against Israel. The second prophecy yet to be fulfilled, there is for a time Israel will dwell in security and prosperity. That is found in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 11. And we know that is pretty much the case today. Israel is fairly secure, but they have to stay on their toes to remain so. They're fairly prosperous. They are a nation that is scientifically intellectual. They are producing goods and services and intellectual properties today, the likes of which really have not been known in their history. And so they are prospering, but they have to maintain a real sense of security. They have a wonderful defense force that helps them with that security. The third prophecy is a coalition, perhaps led by Russia and consisting of the traditional enemies of Israel, likely to be Muslim nations, will actually invade Israel. That is found in Ezekiel 38, verses 1 through 17. Now, this coalition, as we know, is going to be supernaturally destroyed by God. Now, that's really what can be found in Ezekiel 38:18 following, and then in Ezekiel 39, verses 1 through 8. They will be destroyed. they may perhaps be that last bastion in that latter part of the millennium when that big battle occurs. We're not talking here about the Battle of Armageddon, but that one time when these forces will come against Israel. The fourth prophecy, the Antichrist will make a 7-year covenant of peace with Israel and will intervene and guarantee the security of Israel, enabling the Jews to rebuild their temple. That's found in Isaiah chapter 28, verse 18, Daniel 9:27, Matthew 24:15, and Revelation 11:1. So we know that time of peace, which will occur during that first 3.5 years of the tribulation, right after the rapture, will be a time when the Jews will be able to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. And it is in that temple that in Jerusalem that will be rebuilt, that at mid-tribulation, the Antichrist will then commit this desolation time and will sit in the place of the sacrifice and will force people to worship him. The fifth prophecy, near the end of the first 3.5 years, 144,000 Jews will be miraculously saved and sealed by God during the tribulation. We read that in Revelation 7, verses 1 through 8. I mean, Jesus was a Jew, and Israel is loved and treasured by God because of God's faithfulness to his promises. He has been faithful. The Lord has, I think, marvelous last day purposes for Israel. If only Israel will listen, if only Israel will learn and come to a faith in Jesus. The 144,000 Jews, representing 12,000 of those from each of the 12 tribes, I think those 144,000 Jews will be wonderfully converted to Christ during the tribulation and after the exodus of the church, after the rapture. And it is those 144,000 Jews that are going to play a key role during the tribulation in bringing many of those unbelievers during the tribulation to know Christ. And many of those will be martyred. Not the 144,000 Jews. They have been sealed and they are under the protection of God. But those whom they bring to Jesus run the risk, and many will fall under the fate of martyrdom during the tribulation. That is a prophecy yet to be fulfilled. Number 6, at the end of 3.5 years, the Antichrist will enter this rebuilt temple, and he will declare himself to be God. He will declare himself to be God. That's found in Daniel 9, verse 27. We talked about the 70th week. That's a part of that 70th week. Matthew 24, 15 through 18. And 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 through 4. All of those refer to this rebuilding of the temple and the Antichrist declaring himself to be God. 7th prophecy yet to be fulfilled. The Antichrist will break his covenant with Israel, and the worldwide persecution of Israel will result. That's in Daniel 9:27, Daniel 12:1 and 11, Zechariah 11:16, Matthew 24:15 through 21, and Revelation 12:13. So that peace is going to be short-lived, 3.5 years. And there will, following that peace, be worldwide persecution of Israel. But some of those will come to know Christ, and they will be saved, and many of them will be martyred. The 8th prophecy. The Jews will reject the Antichrist, and he will respond with an attempt to annihilate them, killing 2/3 of them in the process. That's found in Revelation 12, verses 13 through 17, and in Zechariah 13, 8 through 9. So they will reject the Antichrist, and he will turn on them, a prophecy yet to be fulfilled. Number 9, at the end of the tribulation, when the Jews have come to the end of themselves, many will turn to God, and they will receive Yeshua, Jesus, as their Messiah. That's found in Zechariah 12:10, Romans 9:27 and 28, and Romans 11:25 through 27. Will all Jews come to know Jesus? No. No, that's not going to happen. But I think there will be many who will come to know Jesus as Lord and Savior. I think some will come to know Him as a result of the gospel preaching of the 144,000 evangelistic Jews. Some will come to know Him, others will not. The 10th and final prophecy yet to be fulfilled, the Lord will bless the Jewish remnant by fulfilling all the promises He has made to Israel. That's found in Isaiah 60, verse 1 through chapter 62, verse 7. So those are the prophecies that I think have yet to be fulfilled. Many coming after the rapture, because the rapture simply has not occurred. But let's also take a look at some prophecies concerning the church. There are some prophecies here concerning the church. Those that I've just mentioned pretty much answer the question of the Jews, but let's look at the church. Christians should find, I think, the fulfillment of these prophecies very encouraging, because God has also made a lot of promises through Bible prophecy to the church. As we see the Lord fulfilling every promise He's made to the Jews, we can be assured that He will fulfill all the promises He has made to the church through His prophetic word. He's promised that one day, very soon, His Son is going to appear in the heavens. There will be the shout of an archangel. There'll be the blowing of a shofar, and all the dead in Christ will be resurrected to meet Him in the sky. And those of us who are alive will be taken up also, not even experiencing death. We know that from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13 through 18, where it speaks of, even though it doesn't use the word rapture, it speaks of the rapture. We will receive a glorified, perfected body. We know that from Isaiah 35:5 and 6, and Philippians 3:21. A glorified body, unlike the body that we live in now. We will return to heaven with the Lord to await the end of the tribulation that we see in John 14. And while in heaven, we will be judged to receive all of our rewards. 2 Corinthians 5:10. And we will celebrate our union with the Lord at the marriage supper of the Lamb in Revelation 19. We will then return with the Lord to this earth, and we will reign with Him for 1,000 years. We know from Revelation 20:1 through 6. And during that glorious reign, we will see the earth flooded with peace, righteousness, and justice, as the waters literally cover the seas. We know that from Isaiah 11:1 through 9. And then at the end of the millennium, we will be removed from this earth, and we will go to that New Jerusalem where the Lord has been preparing for us. And from that vantage point, we will witness the greatest fireworks display in history as God envelops this earth in fire, burning away the pollution of Satan's last revolt that we read about in 2 Peter 3:10 through 13. And out of that fiery inferno will come a new heaven and a new earth where we will live forever in the New Jerusalem in the presence of the Almighty God and His Son, Jesus Christ. We have that promise in Revelation 21:1 through 7. So that's the prophecy to the church. What a wonderful prophecy. What a wonderful promise it is to us that we have this prophecy to look forward to. Now, there's one final question that did come to me, and I want to share that one with you. That question is the Antichrist alive today? Probably, this is one of the most asked questions of all time. And if one reads current end-time posts and writings, it seems that many are concerned about this question. There's even been much talk recently on the internet informing us that the Antichrist is in fact alive today. And those people making such declarations normally claim that God has revealed this to them through some intuition or a dream or a vision. There are even those who think they know his age and they even know who he is. Some of these claims of knowledge about the Antichrist seem to be based on 2 Thessalonians 2:6, where the Apostle Paul states that he will be revealed in his time. According to these self-proclaimed prophets, now is that time, and they just happen to be the recipients of God's revelation. They just happen to be the ones to whom God is revealing this. He's not revealing it to some of the rest of us. As we weigh these claims, I think we need to keep in mind some very basic truths. The first of these truths is that God has already told us how the Antichrist will be revealed. God did that millennia ago through Daniel. In Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, the event that unmasks the Antichrist is when he signs a covenant or treaty with Israel whereby he will guarantee the security of Israel. When that occurs, you know the Antichrist is alive. Now, this event, and not some intuition or dream given to some modern day prophet, is that which I think clearly identifies this malevolent spirit of the end times. To try to convince us that God is hinting at the identity of the Antichrist even before the Daniel event occurs seems either arrogant or somewhat delusional, but certainly not biblical. Now, second, we should recall that Satan has a real problem on this matter of the Antichrist. The problem is that even Satan does not know when the end times will begin. Now, in Mark chapter 13, verse 32, we read, "Now concerning that day or hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, except the Father." So if the angels or the Son do not know the timing of the end time events, we can be sure that Satan does not know either. And yet, in spite of not knowing the time when the tribulation starts, Satan really must have a man in place at all times. Because when God takes the church out of the world at the rapture, Satan must be ready to go and step in by having this man in place for all of the end time activities. He'll want to get started immediately. So, I really think the answer to this question, is the Antichrist alive today, is both yes and no. Yes, only in the sense that I think Satan has identified some Western leader that is available to him to use for this purpose. We already know that the Antichrist will come from the old Roman Empire. That's been prophesied in Daniel as well as in Revelation. You look at Daniel 7 and you understand that. But the answer to this question is also no, in that he will never be revealed until the covenant is signed, starting the 7-year period of the tribulation. So when or if someone claims to have knowledge that the Antichrist is presently alive, and or that they know who he is, his name, his identity, or his age, then my suggestion is walk away and do not believe them. Now, they have no such knowledge. Their claims are false, and they're no more than false teachers or wolves in sheep's clothing. Now, those were the questions that I wanted to get to today, and I really appreciate your being with us for the entirety, now 30 sessions, of this study of the book of Revelation. Let me remind you, and I have a couple of them here behind me, of a couple of books of mine that are available on Amazon if you'd like to read those or to pick them up. They are available there. You just put my name in the search box and they will come up. I would appreciate you reading those. There's a lot of effort and time and has been spent on producing these books, and I think you will enjoy reading them. Periodically during this time, there has been an email address, I hope, that has popped up for you to see. I would appreciate any comments that you have being directed to that email address. Now, we're going to continue our studies next Sunday, but next Sunday I'm going to do something a little different. A number of people have over the years talked to me about versions of the Bible. They know that I typically teach from the Greek New Testament and the Hebrew Old Testament. But they wonder what English versions are best to use. And I'm going to address that issue next Sunday. I have selected 5 or 6 versions of the Bible that I'm going to talk about next Sunday, and I'm going to give a little bit of history of them. And I will talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of each and how each might best be used. So I hope that you'll join us for that study next Sunday afternoon at the same time. Thank you for joining us today and being a part of what I think has been a wonderful, wonderful study of the book of Revelation. I look forward to seeing you next week. So long.